Hello there. Welcome to the Late Night Show with Naveed Nahiyan. I'm your host, Naveed Nahiyan. Today, we have a special guest, Aidan Torgersen, who's also known as the BucketMan. All right, before we start this off, tell a little bit about yourself at first.
Well, I'm a biracial kid who's grown up in Queens, and I have a younger brother who I love very, very much, and he's at home right now. And I guess I've always been very passionate about creating things in my life. Ever since I was a kid, I was very, very headstrong and very, very into superheroes and comic books and all that sort of stuff. And I guess that really had an impact on me growing up, and it led me to do a lot of the choices I made going forward when it came to creating. So I guess that's kind of a general idea of who I am.
Okay, very nice. Now I want to know is what inspired a kid from high school to get into filmmaking? Like, how did it happen?
Oh, okay, so that's a long story, but essentially I've always been fascinated with the camera ever since I was a baby. In fact, there are videos of me when I was an infant where I'm grabbing out, trying to reach the camera, because I was so obsessed with the camera. It was something that was always very in my field of vision. I always wanted to be the one to hold it, be the one to have it, And when I was in elementary school, I remember I got a camera of my own. I was so happy about it, and I would film various things and film myself doing various things. And eventually, when I got to middle school, I started learning how to edit.
Nice.
And that's when I think there was a big change in the way I did things going forward. But if you're talking about direct influences, I have to say that, growing up, I watched the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. I watched, when the Avengers came out in theaters, it showed me the potential of CGI. When I was in third grade, I saw that movie, and I was like, wow. But in terms of so if you're talking about what influenced me to get into the field in the first place, it's been there since I was a kid, even before I ever saw movies. But the movies I did end up seeing propelled me even more forward to pursue it.
Wow, that sounds very inspiring. Now I know is the character BucketMan. Who is he? Who is he actually? How did it come to your head or so?
BucketMan he means a lot to me. BucketMan is a character I created when I was around 6 years old, and it was as a joke. I was a kid. I was joking around. I put a bucket on my head. I called myself the BucketMan, right? And the thing is, a couple years later, when I was in second grade or so, I revitalized the character. I brought him back, and I was like, what if I made actual lore behind him, and what if I made an actual story? And that caused this sort of when I was in elementary school, while a lot of the other kids were, playing, soccer or something like that, oftentimes I was either I was drawing or writing about this character, or I was playing as him in a game that me and my other friends, we used to play, pretend to be superheroes. I would pretend to be BucketMan. And so who he is he's a superhero who stands for pretty much the good I see in people, and the good that I hope to see in myself all the time.
What is the biggest challenge you face while filming BucketMan?
Biggest challenge, I'd say time management. When I did the first BucketMan film, I was in 9th grade. And when you're in high school, you don't have much time on your hands to begin with. And because of that, you're very constricted. And so knowing this, I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to manage the filmmaking with all the stuff I was doing in school. And that's why a lot of the stuff was actually shot in the summer, because I didn't have anything to do in the summer, and I just did BucketMan for that. But time management was always something that I've never really been particularly good at it. And doing it in the context of a school, of having high school go on at the same time, it was very, very difficult.
So how did you resolve those challenges? How did you overcome it?
Well, I mean, not through easy means. I mean, when I got to the second film, BucketMan II, I had learned a bit more about how to balance my time and how to manage things. Because with the first movie, it was so bad that I went entire months without filming scenes. And I didn't even know if I was going to have a finished product by the end. With BucketMan 2, I got a lot better at managing myself with these things, and I knew what I wanted from that movie very clearly. And so it was much easier for me to be able to set aside time for certain scenes that I wouldn't have been able to set aside time for the first film, because there wasn't as much planning involved in the creation of the first film. That the second film was actually better at making. That I did better with planning because I had more experience from the first movie.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of hard work.
Oh
Amazing.
boy, it was.
Yeah.
I don't know how I did it.
Yeah. Now, so tell me about the supporting characters in your film. You know, like Blink and the mentor Ground Wolf.
Oh, Ground Wolf. Ground Wolf was played by my friend Luis Diaz, and he did an excellent job. I cast him in the role because, well, I barely knew him at the time. Funny story. And when I talked to him about it, you know, we didn't know each other very well, but he was interested because it sounded cool to him, and you know, it was something to do after school. The main reason I cast him was because he had a beard, and we were in 9th grade. Not many people had a beard, you know. So, and I was like, a mentor figure has to have a beard. I felt like, you know, you want your Obi-Wan-esque type character. So I had him, and he also had a very stoic way of presenting himself, Lewis. And so when I cast him, I really got what I wanted from his performance in terms of this stoic, calm master type that would lead BucketMan to do what he did. And with Blink, to just summarize that, Blink was my friend Andrew from high school. He's another friend. And basically, after I made the first movie, he saw it when it premiered at Lewis's house. And he was like, I'm actually kind of interested in being in it. If you want any help or anything, just let me know. I kind of think it's cool. So I cast him, and I made an entire character for him known as Blink. And that's how the story of him becoming Blink came into be.
Okay. Now let's talk about the villains in the film. Antonym, Respirator. Why did you choose to give them motivations that you did?
So Antonym in the first BucketMan movie, I'm going to try to keep this brief because I know we're short on time here, but Antonym in the first BucketMan movie is a future version of BucketMan, who's come to the past with a warning with a foreboding warning of a doomed future to come, of an apocalypse. Antonym represents a lot of the more cold and cynical sides of myself, whereas BucketMan represented the more hopeful and kind of naive but moral side of myself. Antonym was the immoral reality, where BucketMan was the, I'd say it's a conflict of idealism versus realism, where Antonym was the realist who believed we have to kill people in order to stop the future apocalypse from happening. BucketMan was the idealist in that you can't just kill people to stop something from happening. We'll find another way. It's the trolley problem, you know? It's like Antonym wants to switch the tracks, but BucketMan thinks he could stop the trolley, which you can't stop a trolley. You can't stop it. And that's Antonym. But Respirator, I'm going to cut it very short. He's a racist. Oh, okay. And basically, that was pretty much what I had going into it. For the second movie, Respirator was the villain for the second film, and he's basically a racist. That's all you really need to know about him. And Respirator's backstory is that basically he watched his entire family get mutated and die from radiation poisoning. And because of this, he develops a sort of complex in which he believes that in order to qualify as being human in his eyes, you have to meet certain criteria. And one of those criteria is not to have mutations, meaning that people who are mutated in any way from what is traditionally known as human, meaning that, you know, if you have an extra arm or something like that, an extra finger, Respirator is going to want to kill you. He will want you to die. If you have, if you have a different structure to yourself, if you have an ailment that others don't, then, well, you have to die because you're not perfect. You're not human in his eyes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, an evil of the world that I wanted to personify that became Respirator, and a conflict of morality I wanted to portray with Antonym.
Yeah. Now, about the actors that plays Antonym and Respirator, can you tell me something about them?
About the villains, well, Antonym is played by me. Because, well, BucketMan, as I said before, he's a future version of BucketMan who comes to the past with this warning of impending doom. So he's played by me, and when I played the character, I had a very different attitude. You know, I wanted to distinguish him from BucketMan because BucketMan's like, I have to stop you, no matter what it takes. And then Antonym's like, You do not know what you're talking about. You're naive. You're young. You know, he speaks with a deeper voice, a more a fascinating demeanor, I think, that he had about him and the way that he portrayed himself. So I'd say that the way that the villains were portrayed, they were done in a way where you could empathize with them, but at the same time, you knew that there was something wrong about them. And that's something I always liked about writing villains, is that you try to make the audience understand them as much as you can without making the villain the hero. And that's what I tried to do with both villains, more so with Antonym than Respirator. Respirator was played by a friend of mine named Jamel.
When I approached Jamel about the role of Respirator, I was initially very nervous, very anxious that he'd say no. I was actually like that with a lot of the people that I asked to be a part of my projects, because I was always worried that people would tell me that what I was doing was stupid, or that they thought I was stupid for even attempting them. I mean, after all, these were movies about a guy with a bucket on his head, and I was very well aware of the ridiculous nature of that. But to my surprise, Jamel was really into the idea of being Respirator, of being the physical voice for the character during the final battle. And I guess I really shouldn't have been so surprised, because at that point I had known Jamel for about 2 years, and he had been my friend, and he'd always been a very cool guy. I mean, when he walked into a room, all of a sudden the vibe was just different. It was brighter. It was happier. Everyone was in a much better mood when he was in the room. And so it's kind of ridiculous in hindsight that I thought that he just like turn me down or tell me that it was stupid. I mean, that, you know, he's not that kind of person. He never was.
All right, then. So now my other question is, what kind of messages do you explore in your films? Like, is there any philosophical idea that you implant into them?
Well, you see, this book right here, I have an entire like catalog of ideas and stuff and thoughts in here, and some of them are about themes and messages that I intend to convey in a lot of my films. And with BucketMan 1, I wanted to portray a conflict of morality, of when is it okay to kill people? Is it okay to kill people, to sacrifice 100 to save billions? Or is it not okay to kill people? Is it okay to kill one person to save 100? And the winner of the argument, you know, I wanted to see who would win that argument. Because in all sense of the word, it shouldn't be a question, because it's so horrible as a question, but yet it is a moral question that we should be asking. It's a philosophical debate over whether or not it's okay to take life in a circumstance. And I felt like that I always love to explore the themes of morality and what it means to be a person and to be someone who is conflicted. And I always want, and so the first movie is about like a sort of grand sense of scale in terms of morality and a sort of dual perspective, a yin-yang perspective, and then the second movie is about depression and about finding who you are.
And I think that one of the debates within the second movie is that whether or not that having an ailment like depression or anxiety, or whether or not that you were born different, if that means that you are somehow less than human. And the answer is ultimately no. But Respirator represents this sort of enforcement of that ideology, of that perspective, that somehow that you are weak. Somehow that means you're inferior to others because that you're suffering in a degree that others don't. And I think that the inclusion of the Shadow Realm that I had is representative of the darkness that comes with the all-consuming nature of depression. And the inclusion of Obscurum, one of the other villains in BucketMan 2, he's a representation of the shadow self.
And I think that ultimately, I think that the themes that I choose them because they're topics I personally really think about in my head as things I want to explore and express, things that might be confusing, things that might be kind of taboo, that people aren't willing to ask these questions because they're uncomfortable. And I like to present those questions and provide either possible answers to them, or I like to just bring them to the surface so that they're known by people. And that's my mission really when it comes to themes and messages within my films.
Have you ever thought about motivational speaking? Because I think you're good at it.
I mean, I try, but you know, I'm not as confident as I seem. Most of it is just an act, and I admit that on camera.
Okay. Now the last one, please. One thing me and the viewers need to know: will there be any more BucketMan films? Like, are we expecting BucketMan 3 or BucketMan 4? Come on, we need to know.
There's a BucketMan 3 in the works. BucketMan 3 is actually the biggest project I've done so far. I've never done anything quite as expansive or anything quite like it before. It is just because with BucketMan 1 and 2, it was mostly me telling the story. It was mostly me doing the work. I did the editing, the directing, I did the music composition. I'm a musician as well, so I did the music. I did like all that stuff. I did like pretty much anything you could think of. I did. I was the actor, and I did so much work for these films. And then with 3, I have people I've met now that can help me and are passionate about projects just like I am. And so now I have a guy who I know who could do cinematography, a guy who I know who could do, the VFX. I know people, or fight choreography. I know people who can do things that I myself lack in those abilities because I am not a perfect person. And I can't do everything all the time. It'll only just stress me out and lead me to just probably more depression. I mean, but to answer your question, BucketMan 3 is the biggest project I've ever undertaken. It is certainly a very ambitious one, but it is one that I intend to answer a different type of question. In that movie, I want to explore the past and whether or not you can change the past, whether or not how you can evolve from the past experiences that are put in front of you, and whether or not you can go back to that moment and change it. Whether or not that you can redefine the past moments by doing something in the future or in the present. And also just about it, a lot of it is also religious allegory and about what is morally right in terms of religion and what is not. Is it right to force your beliefs on somebody else, or is it right to keep it within yourself and keep your ideas within yourself about what you believe is right or wrong? So I think that's the conflict of the third movie, and that's what I'm going to explore. And yeah, it'll come out, I think, in fall, but that's being optimistic. It's been delayed like several times, but hopefully it'll be soon.
All right, man. Can't wait for your film. Thank you for being here. And guys, that is it. Then we'll see you next week.